Studies Section 7, Human Rights. Introduction. The concept of human rights has become an important concept in the world today. There is no single political organization which does not make protestations in respect of human rights. In this study section, you will learn about human rights, Feinberg analysis of human rights, and United Nations of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Learning outcomes for study section 7. After you have studied this study section, you should be able to explain the term human right, state Plato's concept of Feinberg analysis of human rights, discuss United Nations of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights. The concept of human rights has become an important concept in the world today. There is no single political organization which does not make protestations in respect of human rights. Having been denied man for so long in so many nation-states, human rights and preoccupation with them were affirmed internationally when on the 10th of December 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations voted under the title of Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the Charter proclaiming the principles which should animate the treatment of persons in all states of the world, as well as the actions of the organs of the international community. Let us start our discussion with a cluster of questions. In what sense can you say that human beings have certain rights because they are human? What are these human rights? In what ways can these rights be established? These are some of the questions that political philosophers have grappled with. In this study section, you shall go through some of the answers to these questions. That has become a significant concept in the world today. Human rights. Before examining the concept of human rights, it will be instructive to clarify the concept of rights. It is important to make a distinction between legal and moral rights. The former type of rights is clearly stated in the legal system, while the latter rights are not. They are referred to as ideal rights. Concept of rights. The concept of rights has always been viewed as having certain relationship with claims which people have against others, and these claims make it obligatory for others to respect the claims of the right holder. In other words, it is the duty of others to respect the claims of the person. Thus, there is a correlation of rights and duty. If, for instance, A has a claim right against B, it is the duty of B to take certain actions concerning A. The right to a claim necessarily occurs within a structure of rules and regulations. The most important of these structures of rules occurs within the legal system. Feinberg analysis of human rights. Legal claim rights, according to Feinberg, are necessarily the grounds of other people's duties towards the right holder. Feinberg claims further that a legal right is a claim to performance, either action or forbearance as the case may be, usually against other private persons. It is also a claim against the state. An example of claim right: if A owes B some amount, A has the duty to pay B the amount, and that duty seen from B's perspective is B's right to perceive the amount from A. If A has a contract to deliver some goods to B, B has the right to receive those goods from A, and that right springs from A's contractual obligation to B. Legal claim rights are usually well laid out in a legal system, and it is because of this that a claim right can be urged, pressed, or rightly demanded against other persons. Feinberg notes that in appropriate circumstances, the right holder can urgently, peremptorily, or insistently call for his rights or assert them authoritatively, confidently, or unabashedly. Feinberg makes an important classification of claim rights. According to him, there are important distinctions that can be made between impersonam and reign rights, between positive and negative rights, and between active and passive rights. The simplest example of an impersonal right is that of a creditor against his debtor. If A owes B a certain amount, A has a duty to B to repay the amount, and B can insist that A should repay the amount and can rightly show indignation if A does not pay. Feinberg claims that the distinguishing feature of impersonal rights is that they are correlated with specific duties of determinate individuals. Reign rights, on the other hand, are rights which are held against the world at large. That is, they are not held against any specific individual. An instance of this right is the right of a landowner to peaceful use of his land. Feinberg notes that corresponding to this right are the legally enforced duties of non-interference imposed on everyone. The distinction between positive and negative rights is that positive rights are rights to other persons, positive actions. If there is a right, someone has a duty to do something. A negative right entitles someone to other persons' omissions or forbearances. For every negative right, someone has a duty to refrain from doing something. Active and passive rights. Active rights are rights to act or not to act as one chooses, while passive rights are rights not to be done to by others in certain ways. Active rights, according to Feinberg, can be referred to as the right to liberty, while passive rights can be characterized as right to security. From the above analysis, it will be seen that most legal rights claims are correlative with duties. Thus, most philosophers have argued that rights and duties are like a hand in a glove because, according to them, acceptance of duties is the price to pay for having rights. Although the notion of right is closely related to the notion of duty, there is another sense of right that is not linked to the notion of duty. This notion of right is, however, linked to the notion of claim. This conception of right takes it as a claim to something which does not necessarily imply a claim against anyone in particular. Although the concept of right can be defined in terms of claim, this will not be analytically profitable because it will lead to conceptual confusion. Dash right entitles someone to other persons' omissions or forbearances. A. Positive. B. Negative. C. Neutral. D. Concept. B. Negative. Nevertheless, the concept of right can be expressed in the language of claims. And as Feinberg rightly pointed out, claiming is necessary to a full understanding of what rights are. It can be argued that claims are against someone, hence they necessarily correlated with the duties of those against whom they hold. But there could be a sense of claim which is not closely related with the notion of duty. The idea behind this conception of claim is to correlate claim with need, though this claim is not directed against any person. It is a claim which needs to be attended to. In perspective hypothetical case, Feinberg implores us to imagine, for example, a hungry, sickly, fatherless infant, one of a dozen children of a desperately impoverished and illiterate mother in a squalid Mexican slum. Although you may forever despair of finding anyone whose duty it is to provide that child with food, medical attention, and an adequate education, Feinberg argues these needs constitute a claim. These needs, according to Feinberg, constitute a claim against the world, even though such claims against no one at all. Although these needs are claims too, according to Feinberg, they could be taken as claims against. They are rights only on moral principle, and they are not explicitly stated in any legal system as positive rights. They are what could be called ideal or moral rights. The most important class of ideal or moral rights is that of human rights. Human rights are rights that are held by all human beings unconditionally, unalterably, and they are inalienable. Although human rights are usually termed natural rights, not all natural rights are human rights. The concept of natural rights states not only that there are certain human rights, but also that these rights have certain further epistemic properties and certain metaphysical status. However, theory of human rights is neutral with respect to moral ontology and moral epistemology. Human rights are also held to be absolute. What this means is that they are inalienable and universal, but at times, absoluteness could be referring to some additional features which can be interpreted in three ways. Feinberg claims that the first interpretation could mean that all rights are unconditionally incumbent within the limits of their well-defined scope. The second interpretation of absoluteness means that all those parties involved in the implementation of human rights should do their best for the values involved in human rights. They are ideal directives to the parties that would implement these ideal rights that they should be honored in all circumstances. For instance, if a state has taken a piece of land from Bola, the state should compensate her since she has a right to her property. The last sense of absoluteness is the strongest, that all human rights should be honored without exception. The right to free speech would be absolute in the sense that it is protected in all circumstances. In this case, the limit of the rights would be in consonance with the limit of what is specified permissible conduct, and no infringement on the right in any form will be permitted. However, if human rights have this feature, it should not conflict with any of other human rights, either of the same form or another type. Some of the human rights are formulated in such a way that they are vague and therefore different interpretations might be given to them. Some are put in conditional language, while some are formulated in such a way that no detailed specifications are put on them, which make their interpretations controversial. However, in order to remove this air of vagueness, which usually leads to different interpretations, it is necessary to give content to the formal specifications of human rights. At the beginning of this study section, I posed some questions about human rights. These questions are there human rights? Are these rights held by all human beings? And are these rights generally moral, inalienable, irrevocable rights held equally by all human beings? These questions invite us to establish or give justification for human rights. In the contemporary world, human rights have become a popular notion, but the concept that there are rights held by humans still agitates the minds of philosophers, and the skeptic would ask, why treat all human beings equally since some are fools or idiots? Why not base equal treatment on human beings on some criteria that separate deserving ones from those that is not? The skeptic has a legitimate point in asking these questions. The theory of human rights demands that you treat everybody equally, that is, even an idiot or a murderer should be accorded the same treatment as everyone else. In what sense can you meet the skeptic's challenge? In other words, what justification can you give for equal treatment of everyone? Political philosophers have tried to meet the skeptical challenge by positing different justifications for equal human rights. Some philosophers have argued that since everyone has an equal human worth, equal human right should be accorded to everyone. In an illuminating paper, Gregory Vlastos contends that the idea of universal equal human rights assumes that people are of equal human worth, which is to be sharply separated from other characteristics which people might possess. Human worth. He argues that you might grade people according to some of these characteristics, but human worth is not a grading concept. Human worth is quite different from other qualities which people possess and which could be used to treat people differently, since these qualities will bring about vast inequalities that could be used to treat people differently. In a society which is based on the principle of human rights, people would be treated equally because of their human worth. Human worth, according to Vlastos, is like love someone has for another person. The love is not based on any quality like merit, but it is a response to a person as an individual. Latos argues that you normally come to the aid of a stranger in danger, a person for whom you never have affection because you attach a value to any human life which is different from any quality that the stranger might possess. The response you give to the stranger in danger is a response to what Latos calls human worth. Dash argues that you might grade people according to some of these characteristics, but human worth is not a grading concept. Gregory Latos. The skeptic might not be convinced that human worth confers equal rights on everyone. He might still ask, why treat everyone equally according to equal rights? He might argue further that there manifest inequalities among people which allow for unequal treatment in terms of rights. Further, the skeptic might contend that the human worth that is bandied as conferring equal rights on everyone, be it a rogue or a murderer, is like a supervenient property. In other words, it must have this property because of other property or properties. If two things are identical or similar, it is because they possess certain properties in common. So, if you claim that two things are similar in every respect, you are claiming that it is impossible for them to be different in worth, since the difference in worth would be determined by some other properties. Thus, if one thing is more worthy than another thing, it is because there are some properties that bring about this. If two things have the same worth, then there is a feature which they share, which is the basis of their equal worth. So the question is, what is this common feature? There have been many answers posited by philosophers to account for this common feature or property which enables human beings to have equal human worth. But none of this has really been satisfactory in coming to grips with the skeptical challenge that it is impossible to grant equal human worth. Most philosophers would agree with the skeptic that if all men have equal rights, despite the manifest inequality apart from other merits they may possess, there must be one quality which all possess in common and is of utmost moral importance and which confers on them equal rights. Philosophers have tried to posit one quality or the other. The qualities that have been posited range from value characteristics through natural capacities such as rationality, natural vulnerabilities such as pain and suffering, to transcendental properties in intrinsic dignity attaching to all human beings. What you have to note is that none of this has obviated the skeptic's query. If human beings have moral qualities that make them to have equal moral worth, there will be some that have more moral qualities than the others. In other words, all men cannot possess these moral qualities in the same degree and proportion. Hence, some would be morally worthy than others, and therefore all men are not on a par in terms of human worth. Moreover, as Feinberg has noted, the intrinsically moral qualities that are invoked to explain equal human worth must rest, as moral qualities on some common non-value characteristics which are their basis or determinants. The question about the nature of the common characteristics arises all over again about them. The skeptic might ask that if human beings have human worth because of certain infinite value or intrinsic pricelessness, where do these extravagantly dimensioned endowments come from? These qualities can only be ascribed in view of other traits. And if this is the case, what are these other traits that can be used to characterize them? These skeptical queries are intractable and difficult to answer. Moreover, the intrinsic pricelessness that is invoked to explain equal human worth is difficult to verify. In other words, this is not susceptible to empirical verification. Hence, there seems little that can be based on this for asserting that men have equal moral worth. The other favored ground for asserting that men have equal human worth is rationality. The point that is usually made is that all men are rational, and since this is the case, they have equal human worth. However, this point runs counter to obvious fact because some men are more rational than others, and since this is the case, it follows that some men are more worthy than others. However, the point to be noted is that the position would not claim that all men are rational to the same degree, but that even the irrational ones have the potential to be rational. But even this modification runs against certain fact because it is not the case that the potentiality that is claimed would be the same for all men. What perhaps could be said about rationality is that men have the potential to be minimally rational, and this is above anything that any lower animal could have. This point seems not convincing. Although it might be true that all men possess this potentiality in a weak sense, the link between this potentiality and human worth is tenuous. Moreover, most men do not even possess this potentiality of rationality. The third position normally canvassed for equal human worth is the natural vulnerability that human beings have. It is argued that since human beings have the capacity for pain and suffering, they have equal human worth. This position seems susceptible to some difficulties. It can be argued that not all human beings possess the same capacity to withstand pain and suffering. Some are more sensitive than others. In view of this, the position does not seem convincing. The last position, that is usually posited for equal worth, is predicated on certain metaphysical and theological foundations. Thus, you often hear that men are of equal worth because all men are children of God. Each man has a spark of divine reason. Individuals have to be treated as persons, not things. Men are ends in themselves. Men are sacred. All the metaphysical and theological statements about equal human worth seem not convincing for claiming that human beings have equal worth because they are not susceptible to any empirical verification. From what has been said above about justification of human rights, it may have become obvious that justifying human rights is a fallen exercise. There is no way you can provide any justification for the claim that human beings have certain basic rights. In other words, human rights are groundless. It is a kind of ultimate attitude, not itself justifiable in more ultimate terms. However, there is no reason why you should despair that you cannot meet the skeptical challenge on human rights. Human rights are such that they make our world better. You look at other human beings as sharing the same humanity with us. Moreover, you do not look at them as ordinary things, but as people you should respect in the Kantian sense of the term, because they have certain feelings and desires which you also have. In other words, you respect them as having human worth. This human worth cannot be grounded on any quality but only on itself. A world without human rights would be an impoverished one. In conclusion, I cannot forbear to quote from Fembach, who has put this point elegantly. Fembach quotes, "A world with equal human rights is a more just world. It is also a less dangerous world generally, and one with a more elevated and civilized tone, emphasis original." United Nations of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Immediately after the Second World War, the United Nations adopted a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which departs significantly from our normal view of rights. The old-fashioned liberal rights, which stress negative rights, were supplemented by positive rights. The liberal conception of rights, which pertains to civic and political rights, but positive rights pertain to social and economic rights that are correlated with the duties of others, essentially the state. Negative rights are usually viewed as rights that impose restraints on the state as well as others not to interfere with the individuals. The positive rights, however, impose, as earlier pointed out, duties upon the state to provide certain basic needs for the citizens. Articles 22 to 27 of the Declaration, for example, state that the state should provide, as a matter of right, for its citizens medical care, work, education, periodic holiday with pay, protection against unemployment, food, clothing, housing, etc. Positive rights have been criticized for certain obvious reasons. It is argued that rights are usually correlative with duty. That is, if X claims B as a right, it is the duty of others not to obstruct or interfere with X. However, in the case of positive rights, there is no correlative duty attached to these rights. There is no individual, so the argument goes that is under any obligation to honor the rights listed under positive rights. However, there seems to be misunderstanding of the issue at stake on the part of those who deny positive rights as rights in the proper sense of the term. The duty of providing these welfare rights falls on the states. Furthermore, although rights are not correlative with duty in the usual sense of the term, they imply a corresponding moral duty on the part of those who can perform certain actions to bring about the claims attached to these rights. Dash adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War. United Nations. Fembach seems to come close to this position when he says that such rights express the conviction that they ought to be recognized. What could be pointed out is, if these rights ought to be recognized, as pointed out is, if these rights ought to be recognized as potential rights, how could they even be potential rights if they do not correlate with the duties of others? What I'm driving at is that these positive rights, contra Fembach, are grounds for other people's duties. One influential critic of positive rights, social the economic right, is Maurice Kraustein. He has argued that the only genuine rights are the negative rights, that is, those rights that call for the non-interference or inactivity of government or individuals. He argues that most economic and social rights cannot be implemented since conditions might not be favorable for these rights to be implemented. But in the case of negative rights, this is not the case. Furthermore, negative rights, according to Kraustein, are more important morally than social and economic rights. It is important that government should not be arbitrary or cruel in its dealing with its citizens and should also not make measures which will destroy the freedom of the citizens. However, it could be argued that positive rights are important for the realization of negative rights, On some occasions, one's negative rights are abrogated if there are no ways to realize them. Positive rights are therefore necessary components of negative rights. Summary for Studies Section 7. In this Studies Section 7, you have learned that 1. The General Assembly of the United Nations voted under the title of Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the Charter proclaiming the principles which should animate the treatment of persons in all states of the world, as well as the actions of the organs of the international community. 2. Human rights are rights held by everyone because we are all human beings. The notion of right is discussed and Hoffield analysis of right is focused upon in elucidating the concept of right. The negative and positive notions of right are examined. This is the end of Study Section 7. Thanks for listening.